Welcome to the most volatile battleground in human history. It isn't a physical war zone, but a microscopic landscape measured in nanometers, where a single mistake costs billions of dollars and one moment of brilliance can change the way the entire human race thinks, works, and plays. This is the story of advanced microdevices, AMD. Let's rewind to a time when personal computing was a luxury, not a lifestyle. The world was run by Big Blue IBM, and IBM made a rule. They wouldn't rely on a single supplier for their processor chips. They needed a backup. A second source. Enter AMD with the AM286. At this stage, AMD wasn't trying to reinvent the wheel. They were trying to prove they could keep the wheel turning. The AM286 was a fully compatible alternative to Intel's 80286. Technically, it was a marvel for its time because it supported protected mode. Imagine living in a house where every room has a lock on the door that's protected mode. It allowed for better memory management and program isolation. However, the irony was that the world wasn't ready for it. Most consumers were still stuck in real mode, running simple Bulldozer programs that didn't care about these advanced features. What's the lesson here? Credibility comes before creativity. AMD didn't start by trying to overthrow the king. They started by being a useful servant. In your career or your relationships, you often have to establish that you are reliable before you can prove you are exceptional. The AM286 wasn't a revolution, it was a handshake. It established AMD as a trustworthy, low-cost supplier. It taught us that sometimes your first step isn't about being unique, it's about being present and capable. By the early 1990s, the training wheels were coming off. Intel was trying to lock the market down, but AMD played a masterful card, the AM386. This was the 32-bit breakthrough. Why does 32-bit matter? Think of a highway. A 16-bit chip is a 2-lane country road. A 32-bit chip is a massive 8-lane superhighway. The AM386 expanded registers and addressing capabilities, and it introduced hardware paging, the grandfather of modern virtual memory. But the real story wasn't just the specs. It was the strategy. AMD realized that performance meant nothing if people couldn't afford it. They released the AM386 with higher clock speeds than Intel's comparable chips and sold it at a price that made high-end computing accessible to the middle class. It forced the rapid adoption of 32-bit operating systems like Windows. This era teaches us the concept of the pain-free upgrade. The genius of the AM386 was that it preserved full software compatibility. It didn't force businesses to throw away their old work. In life, if you want to introduce change to your family, your team, or your own habits, you cannot destroy the foundation. You must offer a path of least resistance. AMD won this round by proving that progress doesn't have to be painful. As we moved deeper into the 90s, the race wasn't just about width, it was about speed. The AM486 was the refinement phase. AMD began digging deep into the architecture. They added deeper pipelines. Imagine an assembly line where more workers are doing smaller tasks simultaneously to speed up the final product. They added on-chip L1 cache, super-fast memory, and crucially, integrated floating-point units in the DX models. But the magic trick here was the clock doubler and tripler, the DX2 and DX4. They found a way to run the internal processor speed 2 or 3 times faster than the rest of the motherboard. This meant you could drop a Ferrari engine into a Honda Civic chassis and still get a massive speed boost without buying a whole new car. This is the ultimate hack for resourcefulness. We often think we need a new start or a new environment to succeed. The AM486 proved that you can optimize your internal engine even if your external environment stays the same. You don't always need a new job or a new city. Sometimes you just need to clock double your own efficiency, improve your internal habits, your L1 cache, and your workflow, your pipelines, to outperform the competition. Here's where the story takes a dramatic turn. Cloning Intel was safe, but AMD wanted to be a leader, not a follower. They launched the K5, their first in-house, original Pentium-class architecture. On paper, it was brilliant. It took complex x86 instructions and broke them down into RISC-like micro-operations. It was like taking a complex novel and translating it into simple bullet points for faster reading. However, reality is a cruel mistress. The design was too complex to manufacture at high speeds. The pipelines were long, the heat was high, and the clock speeds hit a ceiling. The K5 was late, it was hot, and it was slower than promised. The K5 is a lesson in ambition versus execution. It marks the first time AMD tried to fly on its own wings, and they stumbled. But was it a total failure? No, it was a tuition payment. You cannot innovate without risking failure. If you are trying to build something original, a business, a piece of art, a new software, you will likely produce a K5 before you produce a masterpiece. It was a necessary step toward independent thinking. Bruised but not broken, AMD did something smart. They realized they couldn't just out-engineer Intel alone. They needed fresh blood. They acquired a company called NextGen and used their technology to launch the K6 family. This was the comeback. The K6 brought strong integer performance and MMX support, sliding perfectly into existing Socket 7 motherboards. Then came the K6-2 with 3D NODU. Instructions specifically designed to handle the new wave of 3D gaming and graphics. Finally, the K6 III added an on-die L2 cache, a massive memory buffer right on the chip. Suddenly, AMD wasn't just the cheap option. They were the smart option. They offered 90% of the performance for 50% of the price. The lesson of the K6 is adaptability. When your internal plan fails, like the K5, look external, collaborate, acquire new skills. AMD didn't let pride stop them from buying NextGen to fix their architecture. In your life, do not be afraid to ask for help or pivot your strategy when you hit a wall. Resilience isn't just about trying harder. It's about trying differently. The turn of the millennium. This is the moment the underdog became the wolf. AMD released the K7 Athlon. This wasn't a copy. This wasn't a budget chip. This was a monster. Using high-speed buses licensed from DTK Alpha and a completely new SLADA architecture, the Athlon did the impossible. It beat Intel. The Athlon was the first consumer CPU to break the 1 GHz barrier. Do you remember that race? It was the moon landing of the PC world. AMD got there first. For the first time in history, if you wanted the absolute fastest computer on the planet, you didn't buy Intel. You bought AMD. This is the era of self-belief. The K7 proved that a smaller budget and a smaller team could defeat a monopoly through sheer engineering excellence. It teaches us that labels don't matter. Just because you are from a small town, a small school, or a small company doesn't mean you can't be world-class. Excellence is the great equalizer. When you are undeniably good, the world has no choice but to pay attention. If the Athlon was a punch in the face, the K8, Athlon 64, and Optron was a changing of the guard. Intel was betting on a different 64-bit future, Itanium, that required rewriting all software. AMD said no. They invented x86-64. They allowed 32-bit and 64-bit to coexist. They also moved the memory controller inside the CPU and introduced hypertransport. This reduced latency, the wait time for data, drastically. While Intel's Pentium 4 was chasing high clock speeds but running hot and inefficiently, the cheese myth, AMD was running cooler, smarter, and faster. The K8 architecture became the industry standard. Even Intel eventually had to swallow their pride and license AMD's 64-bit technology. The K8 represents visionary leadership. It's about seeing the destination before anyone else. AMD understood that the future wasn't just faster, it was wider, 64-bit and integrated. In life, don't just run fast. Look at the map. Sometimes the winner isn't the runner with the fastest legs, but the one who knows the shortcut. Success is a dangerous drug. After years of dominance, AMD launched the K10 Phenom. It was a bold concept, a true single-die quad-core processor. But disaster struck. The TLB bug. A hardware error in the translation look-aside buffer caused system crashes. AMD had to release a patch that slowed the chips down significantly to stop the crashing. While they eventually fixed it, the momentum was lost. Meanwhile, Intel struck back with the Core 2 Duo, an architecture that devastated AMD. The K10 era teaches us about perfectionism versus speed. In the rush to compete, AMD missed a critical flaw. A tiny bug in the silicon destroyed the reputation of the whole product line. The lesson? The devil is in the details. You can have a brilliant, big picture. But if you ignore the small details, the structure collapses. Slow down, check your work, Reputation takes years to build and seconds to break. We now enter the valley of the shadow of death. The Bulldozer era. AMD tried to change the game again with a modular architecture. They marketed chips with high core counts, claiming 8 cores when reality was more complicated. 2 cores shared resources. The result? High power consumption, massive heat, and low instructions per clock, IPC. While Intel's Sandy Bridge was running cool and fast, AMD's chips were hot and slow. They lost the server market. They lost the high-end desktop market. Their stock price plummeted to roughly $2. Analysts were writing AMD's obituary. This is the lesson of the sunk cost fallacy. AMD doubled down on the Bulldozer architecture for years, trying to refine a fundamentally flawed design. In life, we often hold on to bad relationships, bad investments, or bad career paths because we have already invested so much time into them. But Bulldozer teaches us that sometimes you have to scrap the blueprint. You have to admit you were wrong and stop digging the hole deeper. The year is 2017. The tech world had written AMD off as a budget brand for low-end laptops. But behind the scenes, a revolution was brewing. Under the leadership of Dr. Lisa Su, AMD wiped the slate clean. Enter Zen Ryzen. This wasn't an iteration. It was a reimagining. They introduced simultaneous multi-threading, SMT, massive gains in IPC, instructions per cycle. Suddenly, gamers, creators, and professionals looked up. The phoenix was rising. Zen 1 is the ultimate story of the second act. It doesn't matter how far you fall. It matters how you land and get back up. Dr. Su didn't focus on the stock price. She focused on the product. She focused on the fundamentals. If your life is in chaos, stop worrying about image. Focus on your core architecture, your health, your skills, your discipline. Build something good, and the success will follow. Zen was a shock, but Zen Plus was proof. Using a 12 nanometers process, AMD tightened the screws. They improved memory latency, fixed the boost clocks, and proved that Ryzen wasn't a one-hit wonder. The Ryzen 2000 series closed the gaming gap with Intel significantly. It showed the world that AMD could deliver on a roadmap. They weren't just throwing spaghetti at the wall anymore. They were executing a military-grade strategy. This era celebrates the power of momentum. Starting is hard, Zen 1, but keeping going is harder, Zen Plus. Many people have one good idea or one good month at the gym. Success is found in the boring work of refinement. It's about doing it again, but slightly better this time. With Zen 2, AMD changed the physics of chip making. They moved to a 7 nanometers process and introduced chiplets. Instead of making one big, expensive silicon die, they made smaller core dies and connected them to a central I/O die. This was genius. It allowed them to scale up to 16 cores on a consumer desktop, Ryzen 9 3950X, and 64 cores on a server. Intel was literally stuck in the mud of their old manufacturing process, while AMD was building Legos. This was the moment AMD secured a decisive advantage in efficiency and multi-core performance. Zen 2 teaches us about modular thinking. When a problem is too big to solve, break it into chiplets. Don't try to solve your whole life at once. Break it down into small, manageable components that communicate with each other. Also, it teaches us that being smaller allows you to be more agile. If Zen 2 was about efficiency, Zen 3 was about domination. AMD restructured the core layout so that 8 cores could access a single pool of L3 cache. This eliminated the latency penalty that held them back in gaming. The result? The Ryzen 5000 series. For the first time in over a decade, AMD beat Intel in everything single-thread, multi-thread, gaming, productivity, and power efficiency. The Ryzen 9 5950X was a supercomputer for the home. This was the historic high point where the underdog officially became the undisputed champion. This is the realization of synergy. By unifying the cache, AMD allowed all cores to work together without barriers. In our lives and organizations, we often have silos, departments that don't talk, or parts of our lives that conflict, work versus health. Zen 3 shows that when you remove internal barriers and unify your resources, your performance skyrockets. With Zen 4, AMD ripped off the Band-Aid again. They retired the legendary AM4 socket and moved to AM5. They embraced GDDR5 memory and PCIe 5.0. they moved to a 5 nanometers process. The clocks hit 5.7 gigahertz. It was a blistering display of speed. But it was also a risk. New motherboards and new RAM were expensive. AMD was no longer just the budget king. They were pushing the premium edge of technology, positioning themselves for the next decade of growth. Zen 4 represents necessary sacrifice. To reach the next level, you often have to leave the old platform behind. You cannot stay in the IM4 phase of your life forever, no matter how comfortable it is. Growth requires investing in new infrastructure, new learning, new tools, new environments, even if the upfront cost is high. And finally, we arrive at Zen 5, the 2024 redesign. The world has changed again. It's no longer just about raw speed. It's about intelligence. Zen 5 is built for the AI era. With a refined 4 nanometers process, wider front-end execution, and dedicated AI/ML acceleration, AMD is pivoting once more. They aren't just fighting Intel now. They are fighting for relevance in a world dominated by machine learning. They are focusing on instructions per watt, because in an AI world, efficiency is the only thing that matters. Zen 5 teaches us to anticipate the tide. The world of 2024 is not the world of 1999. The skills that got you here won't keep you here. We must all become AI forward in our thinking, not necessarily becoming coders, but understanding that the definition of performance changes. We must constantly update our internal operating systems to match the reality of the world. So what do we see when we look back at these 15 eras? We see a company that started as a copycat 286, became a hero Athlon, became a villain to its own shareholders Bulldozer, and then became a legend, Zen. The story of AMD is the story of life itself. It is proof that your current struggle is not your final destination. When they were small, they were clever, 386. When they failed, they pivoted, K6. When they were arrogant, they were humbled, Bulldozer. And when they were written off, they reinvented themselves, Zen. You will face your own Bulldozer moments, years where nothing seems to work, where you feel inefficient and overheated. But you must remember that inside you is the potential for a Zen architecture. You have the capacity to wipe the slate clean, rethink your design, and come back faster, cooler, and stronger. I want to leave you with a question to ponder tonight. Which era of your life are you currently in? Are you in the K5 phase trying something new and failing? Are you in the Bulldozer phase stuck in a bad loop needing to let go? Or are you ready for your Zen moment? Think about it. And while you're thinking, I wish you immense health, unbreakable resilience, and the courage to upgrade your own life's architecture. If this story sparked a fire in your processor, do me a favor, smash that subscribe button. Like the AM4 socket, we are here for the long haul, and I want you on this journey with us.